Yeah, shame is such a deterrent from asking for help. And oftentimes, what I find is the people who struggle the most with shame had a tough time asking for help in their younger years or in their personal life as adults. And so it's almost like an admission of a defect is how people can perceive asking for help of any kind, but particularly mental health help. And I find that once people um, understand the source of their shame, they can kind of place it in history and leave it there and then pursue what they want to pursue, which, in my opinion, people go to therapy so they can maximize their life, not necessarily fix their problems, but look at how they're doing things and see if there's a way they can improve. And a lot of people will call that things like anxiety or depression or trauma, and those labels certainly have their place, but the most important thing is that someone finds a way to optimize their life.
Do you find that to maybe be a disconnect between the parents and the children that they're bringing in because they may not want to necessarily admit that they need the assistance, especially when it involves their child? Because I don't have children, but
Mhm.
parents are in a lot of ways protective. And it's a way, in some cases, they can turn around and say, does this mean that I'm a bad parent?
Yeah.
Like, what kind of thoughts do
Mm.
they ultimately reveal, or maybe even feelings when they're with you and they're going through some of the process or the steps that you described?
Wow, that's such a great question. I think that one of the reasons we're seeing um, children get diagnosed with things like ADHD or autism is in part because it can be a more manageable pill for a parent to swallow if their child is struggling with something organic, something perhaps neurological. Now, by no means is that easy or a preference, but because we live in a society where um, there's a more manualized form of treatment for those kinds of conditions, it seems to parents to be an easier path. And because so many people are now struggling with those things, it almost becomes normalized. I read something the other day like 1 out of 9 kids are diagnosed with ADHD right now. And so there's a whole community and society available for parents if their child is struggling with ADHD. But one of the things that those conditions miss is what's the reason behind the symptoms. And it's not always something of the brain. It is often something of the mind. Um, and I think that is sometimes hard for parents to accept that because no one wants to feel like they're causing their child distress or agony or they weren't around to protect their child. Totally understandable. So I often find myself working a lot with parents to help them work through their own shame and perhaps guilt.
Yes, and I 100% agree because when I look at like the adverse child experiences and how it impacts, let's say, young girls versus how it impacts young boys, and you have like, let's say, young girls would be more promiscuous based on
Mhm.
the trauma that they experience, and then you have young boys that they may be more likely to run away, join a gang, like find their family in the streets. And if you have the parents at home, and a lot of them are hardworking, a lot of them are dedicated, and they just may not be aware for it to hit them and be like, oh my goodness, Maya, my child needs help, right?
Mhm.
I can just imagine them taking a step back and saying, okay, is it because I work too much? Is
Mhm.
it because I did it? Is it because I wanted to give my children everything that maybe I didn't have? Because I can see, let's say, for example, a lot of immigrants who grew up poor and now they're
Mhm.
second generation, they want better for their children. So they're working, working, working. And it seems so painful to stand there and say, Maya, I need help because I think that I'm a good parent, but
Mm.
I'm raising children that are not doing so well. And it seems like if you have a choice for some parents, they rather admit that they're poor versus that
Sure.
their child has something else.